Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar on multi-device testing, challenges, considerations and solutions. Good morning, afternoon, evening from whichever part of the world you've joined us from. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Sanjay and I'm a marketing executive at Upside Learning. I'm going to be doing a quick introduction before we get on with the webinar. There's a couple of housekeeping things I have to go over. You will be receiving the recording of the webinar via an email. We have some polls lined up for you during the course of the webinar, so please do participate. And lastly, feel free to ask any questions from our experts using the chat facility. Now just a bit about the company, Upside Learning. For 10 years, we've been helping organizations of different sizes and types to improve performance through better learning. With our head office in India, we serve clients based in the UK, USA, Australia, Middle East, North Africa, and other countries. A wide range of innovative learning solutions include Upside LMS, a multi-award winning learning management system, custom e-learning, and custom M-learning. We've been recognized and awarded by Brandon Hall, Training Industry, Deloitte, CLO, Apex, Red Herring, and I won the award for the e-learning team of the year for 2013 by eLearning Age Awards. Alright then, so let's begin with the webinar, shall we? It is my pleasure to introduce to you the speakers, Gira Balare, Associate Vice President of Learning Design, and Anushka Karajani, Associate Manager of Quality. Gira, over to you.
Thank you, Sanjay. So here's what we'll be discussing today. We'll begin with the need for multi-device testing, and then we'll talk about some of the key challenges and considerations, as well as some solutions and good practices that we came across or identified while testing e-learning courses meant to be accessed from different devices. And we'll also discuss some of the common issues that we tend to find in such courses. We'll look at some tools and simulators that can provide partial solutions and present some of their benefits and drawbacks. And we'll give you an overview of our multi-device testing lab services and how they could help address your testing needs. So let's get started now. The need for multi-device testing emerges pretty much directly from the increasing need and demand for multi-device learning solutions. And there are several contributing factors for this. The first is changing computing paradigms. So starting with, mainframes in the 1960s, technology has certainly come a long way. So after mainframes, we had personal PCs, the small, larger desktop computers. So going from them to networking, to the internet and the World Wide Web, and mobile devices then, different shapes and sizes, and cloud computing. So learning solutions in the past as well as today need to keep up with the latest technologies, and they need to be served up on the latest devices. So definitely then there's multi-device learning and multi-device testing that comes with it. Another contributing factor is BYOD, or bring your own device policies, that seem to be gaining acceptance. Gartner predicts that by 2017, half of employers will require their employees to supply their own device for work purposes. So interestingly, they use the word require. So maybe it's not so much optional, it's going to be an expectation perhaps. And corporate liable programs also would reduce, which is where the organizations provide the devices, maybe with contracts for their employees to use. So from that point of view, if the organization is providing the device, yes, they do have a certain amount of control then over which device is being provided. But nevertheless, yes, BYOD would be increasing. And towards maturity also ran a study and published a report, In Focus Mobile Learning at Work. And in that, they found that 66% of top learning companies that they surveyed did have a BYOD policy in place in 2013. So that does match with the trend that Gartner too was seeing. However, Towards Maturity's Mobile Learning at Work study, they found that 60% of top learning companies provided learners with smartphones, and 48% of them provided them with tablets. So there's a bit of maybe a slight difference here, because it seemed like there was corporate liable programs in place then. So whether that decrease or not remains to be seen. But BYOD seems to be on the increase. The third contributing factor is changing work trends. So part-time and temporary jobs have been around for a while. Perhaps they're more prevalent for some types of jobs, or maybe even in some countries than other. But it does seem that the concept of full-time, 9-to-5 work seems to be slowly petering out. Again, at least for certain types of jobs. And increasingly it's about flexible work practices. And that's a trend that the Emerging Technologies Outlook program predicted way back in 2001. So it includes flexi timings, flexi schedules, telecommuting maybe from home or even from hotels, different sites, different places of work, any other locations, contracting, and even flexi tasking. And in his top 10 workplace trends for 2014, Dan Schwabel predicts that freelancing will become a normal way of life, to the extent that freelancers and contractors and consultants will exceed the number of full-time workers in just another 6 years, so that's by 2020. This would mean more people working from outside the office and therefore using their own devices. So training and performance support need to be available to all these people, no matter where they are, when they may choose to work, or what devices they use to carry out this work. And lastly, there's more millennials increasingly entering the workplace. According to the Business and Professional Women's Foundation and the Deloitte Millennial Survey, millennials are expected to make up around 75% of the global workforce by 2025. Now, how do millennials, or how does Gen Y like to learn? They tend to like to look up, search, and discuss, and that's when they need it, rather than maybe storing up things in advance. So they're used to the latest technology. They're used to changing technology, and sort of keeping up to date and using the latest technology, whether it's about the devices or connectivity or different types of softwares and applications. They're very much connected. They're always sharing, contributing, collaborating. They're often using more than one device simultaneously, and they prefer to search for and to locate information and use tools as and when required when they need to get something done. So it's task specific and also has a particular objective then. So from a learning solutions viewpoint, this can mean things like maybe searchable repositories, checklists, job aids, maybe how-tos, short little simulations, specific information in smaller doses, especially on mobile devices then, because those are more relevant or more prevalent for lookup and referencing. And with them, again, they need to be available on demand with continuity. So wherever the individuals are and whatever device they may be using at the time. So device agnostic learning solutions seems to be what it's all about. And responsive design and adaptive design have today become common approaches for achieving such types of learning solutions. And with them then comes the need for very, very thorough comprehensive testing in order to ensure that whatever e-learning or learning solution you create works properly, works as you intended on a very wide variety of devices and configurations. So at Upside, for us, our move towards multi-device learning started with creating e-learning solutions that worked on both desktops and landscape-locked tablets. So this meant shifting to HTML development. It didn't necessarily eliminate Flash, in the sense that wherever there were cases where we felt we needed animations, rich animations, those are still created in Flash and then incorporated as videos into an HTML framework. So after this, the next step that we took was we created or we developed adaptive design, where we created output for desktops and then for landscape as well as portrait lock tablets. So here there is a greater variety of devices and orientations, but again it's fixed layouts. So there's a fixed layout for portrait, there's a fixed layout for landscape, and anything that falls in between or is different from that again would not be accommodated in this type of an adaptive design. And then we realized that there's an emerging demand and need for fully responsive solutions that need to work on all types of devices, so desktops, tablets, smartphones, and of all dimensions. So we focused then on developing our own in-house framework for responsive e-learning development, which we call FRED. And I think it's while testing FRED, the framework itself and the courses that we created, while developing FRED, that we truly understood what it takes to do effective multi-device testing. So before we go any further, let's just find out how many of us here right now have some experience of multi-device testing. So we'll just run a quick poll. So your experience might be, as testers, maybe as members or leaders or managers of teams working on e-learning or even software, websites, intended to run on multiple devices. So we'll just give it a bit more time. Right. Okay, so it looks like more than half of us have some experience, maybe some idea of it, have worked in some way with, and there are some of us who have no experience and some who have considerable experience, which is nice. I mean, because it's still a relatively new field. I think responsive design, multi-device, e-learning, and then of course the testing that goes with that. So it's great to see that some of us already have considerable experience. And for the rest, yes, we hope that we all learn some things during this session today. We do want to also put up a second poll question, which I think would be applicable then for those of us who've had experience, just to find out about the the different device mixes that have been experienced. Okay. Okay, all right. So it looks like, again, a lot of us already, who have that experience on all three devices then, which again, shows how much responsive design and multi-device design is increasing. But it's also very interesting to see that there's a fair amount of people who have experience of a combination of desktop and tablet. And I think that tablets are, they're a nice, relatively easier, convenient, maybe more comfortable also step towards mobile learning. So to go first from, maybe content on desktops to switch then to tablets and then make the move to, fully go into a mobile learning strategy. So good. Thanks for, participating in these. So we'll start off then, with just sharing some of our experiences, basically. So in terms of challenges then, we found that the biggest challenge along the way was quite simply the number of combinations that were possible. So there are devices, manufacturers, models, browsers, versions, operating systems, versions. You can't test each and every combination. And, over and above that, for, each and every testing parameter that exists, it really wouldn't be possible to test every combination. So the first thing that we realized we needed to do was to very, very clearly define the testing environment. And we found that there were two approaches for that. So if there's a very specific target range, maybe very precisely defined and limited, then it could be maybe defined just straight off. So what are the different device types? And for each one of them then, the operating systems and versions, browsers and versions, and maybe dimensions, resolution ranges. So that works well, for a limited target range. However, especially when it comes to responsive learning, the target range does tend to be wider. And so what we found to be easy was to go in for an optimization approach. So this involved then looking at different usability statistics, usage statistics and popularity of devices. So there are some sites from where you can get good data for that. For example, here we've shown data that we got from W3 schools, and we have something from Net Market Share on the next site. So by looking at sites like this, you come to know, what we came to know what are the different browsers in use, what are the different OSs that are more popular than others, and also then by looking at sales data sometimes of either manufacturers or retailers, you can also come to know what are more popular devices and models. So once we had sort of looked at data like this, we identified from this then an optimal set of devices, operating systems, and browsers. And we manually then worked out permutations and combinations and created a testing matrix. So we put up a rough sample here. So it's just something that, from all that data to narrow down and say that these are the devices of different types then, the platforms, versions, and browsers and versions for each. And then for each combination then, whether it is, maybe fully applicable, partially applicable, or maybe not applicable at all, which is what the color coding signifies here. We also realized then, while doing this, that we tended to get into browser versions more for Internet Explorer, whereas for Firefox and Chrome, mostly it would be the latest versions because they got automatically updated. And we realized that we needed to relook at our test cases. So the test cases also needed to be refined and extended to make sure that different devices were getting covered. So for example here, this particular scenario, when displayed and run on the desktop PC, the test case for that would define testing the navigation through scenes by using the back and next arrows and also by using the numbered buttons at the bottom. The test case for the same page on a tablet has one additional case, which is to check swipe navigation, horizontal swipe navigation, to move between the scenes. And on the smartphone then you may notice that it doesn't look the same. That's because of our responsive design strategy. So we felt that you can't squish it beyond a certain point. It will become illegible. So when we went below a certain display size, we changed the treatment then of this particular type of page and we present it more like almost like a WhatsApp sort of chat conversation with icons to indicate who's speaking. So because the nature of the treatment has changed, now the test case changes completely for smaller devices, and it would then talk about checking vertical swiping and scrolling through scenes. The next point of consideration, once we had our matrix defined, was to check against the devices that were defined in that matrix, how many did we have available? Did we have them all, and could we use tools and simulators to cover any of the missing ones? So we did try out some tools and simulators at this point, and finally we concluded that actual devices and setups were very much required for accurate results. So some of the tools and simulators were helpful in some ways, or for some aspects of testing. We did also find some limitations when it came to using them to test e-learning solutions that we create. And we'll be covering those in more detail later in the session. At this point, I think suffice to say that we ended up purchasing a few new devices to cover the optimized range that we had defined. Based on our initial experiences, again, we felt that in terms of testing rounds, to start with one representative device of each type made sense. So picking, a desktop a tablet in portrait mode, and the smallest of the smartphones, again in portrait mode, and start the first testing round with those. This would allow us to validate content for all the breakpoints as a first sort of major stage of testing, and to do that first stage then 100% manually and one device at a time. In retrospect, another good practice is to take those results, do the issue fixing, do the re-verification, be sure that they're fixed, and only after that then to expand to further testing rounds. So there's a basic set of fixes that, by doing something so that you ensure that they're not replicated, or you don't have to test for them on all those combinations. So when it came to testing the other combinations, again we found it effective to go device type-wise. So covering first, desktops and any tablets which in landscape view which are close in size to the desktop display. Then going on to maybe smaller tablets, tablets in portrait mode, and finally going to smartphones in both modes. And in each round or each pass, covering all applicable browsers and OSs then in succession before moving on to the next. Along the way, we also realized that logging issues, well, there's a lot of issues to log. There's a lot of duplication that comes up also. So maybe one of the ways then to be more efficient in that is to use keywords smartly when logging issues. So either to use keywords related to devices, or again operating systems, versions, browsers, or even a particular category of testing or of issue. So that helps reduce duplications, and it also helps in grouping. So grouping helps when it comes to then releasing a set of grouped issues, makes it easier to fix because they're all related and you could have maybe a go at them at one time. If you're using a testing tool, keyword tagging may be mandatory and may be used by a tool to automatically cross-link and associate issues. It really depends on tools being used. And we identified one more aspect of multi-device testing, which adds to, already it takes more time and effort because of the range and variety that needs to be tested. And what adds, again to that time of effort is the fact that you have to retest and re-verify all combinations. So if you're testing, for a single device or maybe a single device and a couple of browsers on it, the issue that you log needs to be re-verified only on that device and combination. But the issues that we logged when we were doing multi-device testing, they were fixed, but it wasn't sufficient for us to recheck them only on that combination. We needed to recheck them, across all combinations once more to ensure that everything was still working well. So yes, definitely multi-device testing is a very intricate and meticulous process. So while doing all this testing, then especially on our framework, we did come across common issue categories, common types of issues. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Anushka to take you through those.
Thank you, Veera. Before we start, I would like to ask a question. What special or additional parameters would you test differently for multi-device learning? You can share your answers through the chat window.
So we're just trying to see here whether, especially for those who do have experience, whether there's something different than or additional that you found you had to do when it came to multi-device testing. Okay, I think we'll continue, and if anything comes up that you'd like to share, please do go ahead and enter it into the chat window.
Okay, now let's look at what we consider as a special parameters for multi-device testing. Multi-device testing is a time-taking and complex task, and if not carried out meticulously and comprehensively, learners may face a wide variety of problems. So based on our experience with multi-device testing, we have identified 4 broad categories with their respective parameters. So we will show you and discuss some typical issues under each of these. So the first parameter we want to cover relates to the browser differences. And by this, we are referring to the fact that every browser has its own HTML rendering engine and interprets JavaScript differently, which causes inconsistencies across browsers. These could be content, functionality, or could be usability related issues. One of the most common issues we encountered in content misalignment. What looks fine on one browser can have issues on another browser. For example, here you can see the same screen on 2 different browsers, IE10 and Firefox 32. And you can see that logo is getting cut on IE10, whereas on Firefox it looks correct. In the next example, here you can see this video has shifted down and it is overlapping to the navigation panel on IE8, whereas in Chrome 37 it is aligned properly. Misalignment can cause functionality issues too. For example, the transparent hotspot have shifted in IE8, whereas this interferes with their click functionalities. Another aspect related to browsers and specifically to IE relates to the extent of HTML5 support. IE8 has minimal support for HTML5 elements, while IE11 has complete. Here in the example, we can see that IE8 doesn't support rounded corners, whereas IE11 does. Next example is for image quality. Image quality too can differ from device to device depending on size and resolution, or if scaled from browser to browsers. So you need to keep a lookout for distorted or blurry images. Here in the example, you can see the graphic has blurry lines in Chrome, whereas in Firefox and Safari 8, it looks very sharp. Next point, readability. Here 3 devices have 3 different resolutions, and we can see that the font size is not consistent on all the devices, and it also less easily readable on bigger Samsung tab. This is because text size differs from device to device depending on the resolution. The higher the resolution, the smaller the text appear. While inconsistencies in text size can't always be avoided, it's important to check readability on range of devices in such a way that all target resolutions are covered. Next thing, content meaning and interrelationship. Changes to layout for different dimensions could cause a change in the meaning or relationship between 2 pieces of information. For example, here the speech bubble arrow is pointing to the lady's hand. Other examples could be incorrect diagram sequence or diagram labels or image captions getting incorrectly positioned. Target touch areas. This is more around usability. Having small touch areas will lead to user clicking the wrong buttons. Here in the screenshot on the left, we can see that the draggable options are very close to each other, which makes it difficult for the user to attempt interactivity comfortably. When the options are more spaced out, as shown on the right, it is more user-friendly. So what about the nature of interactivities? Are they well suited to different devices? Here is an example on a desktop. You can see all options together and can drag to reposition them. On a smartphone, you have to scroll to see all the options, and you would have to drag beyond the visible areas to reposition, which is not so convenient. So the nature of interactivity has changed to touching up or down arrows to rearrange one level at a time. Visual cues for gestures. Put yourself in the learner's shoes. Do you know what to do? Do you know how to interact with the content? Is it intuitive, or are there clear and device appropriate instructions and or visual cues for new or specific gestures? So here this example is actually from the tablet based app, but it still gives us a good idea of how to give gestural cues. On a desktop, this may change to a cue that tells you to click arrow or drag a slider to rotate the car and click the hotspots. Navigation. This is another big usability point. The navigation elements and structure should be conducive to device type and size. For smaller devices like smartphones, we need to check whether the navigation controls are logically grouped and layered. More frequently used controls should be placed on the main screen, while less frequently used controls should be layered and placed at the second level. Compliance. SCORM, AICC, XAPI or TINCAN will need to be checked on multiple devices. This will include typical parameters like bookmarking, status, score and so on. And there is an additional check you will need to do if sequencing is implemented, that is if there is continuity across devices. Sequencing will only happen if the same LMS is accessible from all devices and you are online from all devices, and or if there is an offline player compatible with the LMS through which you can view courses offline and sync later. Performance. Check how the e-learning is performing on different devices with different configurations and how interruptions are handled. In case of poor performance, it may be worth checking on package size or even on the number of images in the package. So yes, these are the very important and specific parameters which we consider for multi-device testing. Now Gira will share our observations and experience around testing tools and simulators. Gira, over to you.
Thanks, Anushka. Well, there's no doubt, I think after hearing that testing multi-device e-learning and especially responsive e-learning is a complex and complicated activity. As we mentioned earlier, we did try some tools and simulators to see to what extent they could help. So we'd like to just give you a quick summary of our experiences. Please do keep in mind that we explored these tools and simulators with a specific focus on their capability to test multi-device e-learning, not websites or web applications, which is what they were intended for. We wanted to see how well we could use them for our e-learning solutions. So the first category then that we tried was synchronous testing tools, and we tried a tool called GhostLab. So GhostLab allows testers to wirelessly pair multiple devices to a main desktop and then carry out synchronous testing. So it supports iOS, Android, Windows, and BlackBerry devices. Because GhostLab is about concurrent testing on actual physical devices and configurations, you can check real user experiences. So we found it very important to be able to check on physical devices. So in the picture here, you can see most screens displaying the same page at the same time. You will also see that some of the content is different. It is the same page. This is because of our responsive design strategy. So when the screens get smaller, we choose sometimes to drop visuals or to change the nature of the treatment. So with GhostLab, then any changes, changing a page or displaying content after clicking a button, we could see them getting simultaneously reflected on all connected devices. We found it useful for checking visuals and content alignment, especially at the page end state. We also found it good for joint reviews and for a quick final run through or re-verification prior to release of a delivery. It could also be a good tool for developers. So not just for testers, but for developers. So you change a piece of code, for example, and you're able to immediately see the effects of that change then on all the devices at a time. And it could also be helpful for testing text-based courses. Another tool that we tried to explore in the same category, synchronous testing tools, was Adobe Edge Inspect. So that too allows synchronous output to be tested on physical devices, and you can connect up iOS and Android devices as well as Kindle Fire. With Adobe Edge, you need to install the main application on a desktop computer and then launch the course that you need to test through a Chrome browser. On the connected devices, you can then access that synchronized course through the Edge Inspect app. So Adobe Edge loads HTML pages, and if you'd like to control course level navigation synchronously through the main desktop, it requires a separate URL for each page, which means it can be effective for testing Lectora or other HTML-based courses that are structured so as to have a different URL for each page. Page-level interactivities also can be synchronously controlled through the main desktop if the content that appears on click or after the interaction is available on a separate URL. So based on our experiences with trying synchronous testing tools, where we realize it's obviously very difficult to simultaneously keep one's eyes on so many devices, especially if you're trying to see something progressing or building up, which is why we did find it useful for checking alignment and visuals maybe at a static end state, but to check, like, say, an animation build up on multiple devices at the same time wasn't very friendly. We also found the same thing when it came to hearing audio. Listening to audio on multiple devices at the same time doesn't work. And when it comes to e-learning, then we do often have audio-driven courses. And so we were not able to check syncing of content then on audio with synchronous testing tools. We also found it inconvenient in some cases to test interactivities. So Anushka had shown us this example earlier. So on the tablet, when we swap a couple of options, we can see that nothing changed on the smartphone. Again, it's worth mentioning again that maybe this is because also, or this is an inconvenience that we face because of our responsive design strategy. So we choose to change the treatment then on smaller devices. So because you're not looking at the same thing, then there's no synchronous action, and vice versa. So when we use the arrows to swap between two different items on the smartphone, it did not reflect on the tablet. So in such cases, then synchronous testing tools may not be that helpful for testing multi-device learning. Again, based on different behavior types on different devices, here's another example. So here we see the social engineering display with its definition is available on the tablet, and we make our way through different types of threats. These are information security threats. So we make our way through them by using the arrows on either side. Now, because the smartphone has a different display, when we use the arrows to go through the desktop display, nothing changed on the smartphone. So we then would have to go manually and expand the accordion interactivity on the smartphone to check the smartphone content, and there was no reflection of that then on the tablet. So again, yes, depending on the nature or the design of an e-learning course, tools for synchronous testing may be more or less useful. For courses with a single URL specifically, depending on the tool you're using, you may need to manually advance the page or manually work through an interactivity on the connected devices, which can then become a slightly longer process. And again, depending on the tool and how the tool allows you to access the synchronized course through the connected devices, it may or may not be possible to check browser-related issues. Another category of tool that we tried to test was simulators, and we tried BrowserStack, which is a cloud-based simulator. And we found that useful again for checking text alignments on a specific combination of browser and OS. So it was also good for catching visual issues. You can see at a glance whether there are visual mismatches. So the desktop on the left is running BrowserStack, and we can see there that the button edges are crooked. So BrowserStack, if we go as by BrowserStack, we would report this as an issue. When we cross-check then on the actual course and ran it on the actual desktop, we found the same button was, it did have crooked edges. So from that viewpoint, we were getting accurate results then, and BrowserStack was useful to help us catch such types of issues. We also tried some SDK simulators. So we tried the iOS simulator and the Windows simulators. And we found that with both of them, we were able to check content and alignment and layouts quite reliably. So this is an example from the iOS simulator, and here's one from the Windows simulator. So whatever you're seeing on the desktop version, you're seeing exactly the same thing on the actual device, on the actual phone. We did encounter some inconsistencies though with the Android emulator. So for example, here we can see that on the desktop, the text is getting cut. So if we were to go by that, we would report it as an issue. However, when we looked at it on the actual smartphone, the text was not getting cut. So strangely enough, it was the other way around in this case. Here again, the text at the bottom on the emulator gives the impression that it's overlapping, that there's an issue there, it's sort of coming out of the text holder. However, when we re-verified then on the actual device, it was displayed just fine. And the third inconsistency that we found when using the Android emulator was about videos. So the videos, we could see the progress bar, we could see the video controls, but we couldn't see the actual video. Whereas on the tablet, when we tried to launch the same thing then on the actual device, it played just fine. So again, to summarize, based on our experiences with simulators, we realized we can't really get away from the fact that you can't check the actual learner experience with a simulator because you're not using physical devices. So there could be some inaccuracies and performance mismatches, which would be based on the configuration or the resolution of the machine running the simulator. So they may not necessarily be actual issues, but because of that mismatch then either on the local machine or the remote machine, depending what simulator is being used, there's a danger of logging issues that are not necessarily issues. Checking real-time physical device aspects again, like battery life, charging, maybe actual bandwidth speed, would also not be possible when using simulators for testing. Nor could we check any content or functionality that was maybe dependent on physical device features, like the camera or GPS location, accelerometer, or even we couldn't simulate interrupts, like Anushka mentioned earlier about performance testing. So because we weren't using the actual devices, we couldn't see how our e-learning course would behave, how it would handle an interrupting incoming phone call, for example. And finally, e-learning, there's a lot of custom interactivities on multiple devices. And when it comes to touch devices, with the simulator, we were not able to test gesture and navigation. So we were not really able to evaluate the actual tactile experiences on the actual devices. And additionally, when it came to cloud-based simulators, because it's a remote simulator, content loading, maybe speed, smoothness of animations, that can vary based on the connection, which again can lead to some inaccurate issues being logged. remote simulators can also cause some difficulty when it comes to testing interactivities. So for example, we found we couldn't select a particular option, and that was again due to content loading. It was not selectable because it hadn't loaded properly. But there's a danger then of logging that as an issue. So to reiterate, our intention was to try some tools and simulators out there and see how they could be of use in testing e-learning specifically. All the tools and simulators we tried were actually designed and developed for testing websites and web applications. And yes, we did find them helpful in some ways for testing certain aspects of learning. But finally, we do still find it very, very important to have the physical devices and to be able to test on those. So as we've been discussing, looking at the challenges and the conditions, the different testing parameters, effective multi-device testing requires three things. First, the correct infrastructure and setup. Secondly, sufficient experience and expertise in testing e-learning solutions for multiple devices, and all that then supported by well-defined processes and practices. So we've put that together then internally, and we have our own testing lab in place, and we use that for testing our projects. We do also understand that it may not be feasible for everyone to commit to or fulfill this set of requirements, especially if you're looking to test maybe a single course or just a few courses. So that's why we also offer our multi-device testing lab as a service. So we'll use our infrastructure, expertise, and process, and test your multi-device e-learning, either on a target range that you specify, or that we'll work out with you then based on optimization and get an agreement on that. So our testing lab, this is based on the optimization exercise that we carried out. This was sort of a range of issues and configurations that we thought constituted a good comprehensive testing lab. So there's different operating systems, browsers, and devices. So just to give you a quick idea, Windows, Macs, laptops, so those take care of the larger displays. Again, different types of tablets and smartphones. But with this particular range that we define through optimization, we're able to cover screen sizes between 3.5 to 10.6 inches for mobile devices, and resolutions between 320 by 480 and 1536 by 2048 pixels. And of course, new devices, we know they keep getting introduced, they're going to keep getting introduced. Browsers and operating systems will continue to be updated. So we do know that we have to continue to add to the set of devices available in our lab to keep up then with what's current. We have over 10 years experience in designing and testing different types of e-learning, including HTML-based projects. So we've seen an increasing demand for HTML-based output for multi-device, and now more and more responsive approach over the past 3 years. Our quality team today tests around 30 projects a month, and the majority of those are HTML-based. So there's really a decreasing trend then for Flash-based output. Again, we've experienced slight rise on rapid authoring output, maybe using tools like Articulate, Storyline, and Captivate. Again, those could output either to Flash or output HTML-based content for multiple devices. We also, as we mentioned earlier, gained a lot of experience and insights while testing Fred. And we were able to do that then with two approaches. So we had a desktop-based approach of graceful degradation, which went from maybe larger to smaller, and also a mobile-first approach, progressive enhancement, which considered mobile devices, then smaller mobile devices as the key target device. So our team does also have experience then in testing content or output for multiple devices using either of these approaches. And they have total around 50+ person years of testing experience. And just to give you a quick overview of what we felt was an efficient process then that we defined for testing on multiple devices, starting with requirement analysis. So understanding what technology was used to develop the course, what's the content about? So what's going to be the nature of the content, and what type of treatment is there going to be for the content? So what can we expect to have to test? And is that treatment going to change, or will it remain the same then across all devices? Because something like that can be a consideration when it comes to even to efforts. So knowing that if it's exactly the same treatment, maybe it counts as one page to be tested. But if the same page differs in behavior on different devices, you may actually have to count it as 2 or 3 pages. So about the content, then how is the course structured? What's the expected duration of the course? Of course, what is the desired definition of target devices and configurations? Delivery method, to know whether we have to test for things like compliance-related aspects, as Anushka had mentioned, and any other standards we need to comply to, and of course what inputs we would be provided with. So based on all this, then we're able to estimate the required time. And if this is being provided as a service, then we would probably put all that into a proposal to be sent over to you. So after the proposal and the scope document are finalized, we go through project initiation. So again, for our existing projects, this is already done. So testing is done at the last part, the last stage is done of a project. Otherwise, it involves then planning and setting up internal systems. So for communication, for project management, configuration management, and if a particular testing tool is being used, that, or if we have to use a particular tool for logging issues, then again, whatever are the setups or the protocols also related to that would be set up at this stage. After that, we found that we very much needed to have a test strategy documented, so defined and documented before moving on to actual testing. So what are the testing activities to be carried out, in what sequence, then defining that testing environment which has been agreed upon. The scope of testing, whether it's content testing, GUI testing, standards, functionality, it can vary again depending on what the requirement is or what the project is. Any documents, references, so whether we needed to relook at checklists also, maybe make specific checklists depending on the requirement. Mechanisms for issue tracking and reporting, and also risk management at this stage. In the next stage then, test cycle execution. Our team actually carries out testing on the target devices and combinations, physical devices. During testing, if we identified earlier a need to review and add to our test cases, we would do that and then go ahead with the testing. So we test the content, GUI, navigation, depending on what the scope is, and create test reports. So for our team also, internally these test reports are what our team uses to do issue fixing. And again, if this is being offered as a service, we would pass those test reports to you then, so that you could do the test, the fixing of the issues. Once that's done, then we re-verify as many times as is required, until we're really able to say that issues are fixed, or well, maybe they're agreed to be deferred. So after testing on actual devices is done, the last stage of the process then involves sending a final delivery confirmation mail and a final test report and a bug density report. So that's just looking at the different statistics about the issues found during all the rounds of testing. So maybe what types of issues were greater, what was the trend then of issues over the rounds of testing. So getting some statistics then about what was tested. We do also have a closure meeting, and again, if provided as a service, we will have that with you to discuss learnings, what we both learned then, and what went well, and maybe what could have gone better. Post-closure specifically then, if this is being offered as a service, once the warranty period mentioned in the proposal has expired, we delete your course from our internal systems and retain copies only of the documentation, so the bug reports and the compliance reports. So that's the type of process that we felt we needed to have in place for multi-device testing. And I guess that's it. So that was a quick overview of multi-device testing, some tips and good practices based on our experiences along the way, including the common parameters that we've tended to see while testing multi-device courses, and a quick introduction to our testing lab. So we hope that this helps you to define or streamline further your own multi-device testing activities, processes, and your own lab also. Or if you want to utilize ours, then we're happy to hear from you. And at this point, if anybody has any questions, please do let us know through the chat window, and we will do our best to answer. We'll just hold on for a couple more minutes to see if anybody has any questions. Okay, if you do come up with any questions, our contact details are here, so we can also answer through email. Thank you for attending, and bye-bye.